We did that.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we could, in deference to your time, first of all, thank you for being here. As you know, one of the things was we really read the bylaws. To accomplish certain tasks, we do need a quorum, and so I will need to run the listing to see whether or not we have a quorum. If I could, Mayor Collins, Mayor Harley,
Here.
Mayor Best, Mayor Stumbo, City Manager Merkerson, Mayor Rickert, Mayor Larry, Mayor Faircloth, Mayor Shaheen, Chairman Hart, here. Chairman Brockman, Chairman McCraney, Chairman Brower, Chairman Walker, Chairman Hall, Chairman Stoniker,
Here.
Chairman Pointer. Now with Chamber Presidents, Ms. Fisher, Ms. Pauck,
Here.
Mr. Slade,
Here.
Mr. Dyer,
Here.
Ms. Campbell,
Here.
Mr. Law, Mr. Swanson. Military Affairs Committees, Mr. Adamson, Mr. Miller, Mr. Usery, Mr. Walker,
Here.
Mr. Reynolds,
Here.
Mr. Avery, Ms. Hahn, Mr. Cravey, Mr. Topping, Ms. Giesling. Representing the Regional Development, Ms. Mathis, Mr. Hatcher, Dr. Hines, Mr. Martin, Dr. Allen, Dr. Murphy, Dr. Underwood, General Goddard, Ms. Boletto, Mr. Bartness, Mr. Sanders,
Here.
Mr. Wainlow,
Here.
Mr. Evans, Mr. Hart, Mr. Byrd.
Here.
Mr. Bird's missed one meeting in 27 years, and it was last time when we did the roll call, so.
Thank you, Brandon. Viper.
And to tell you that I've not heard a lot about that would be an understatement. Mr. McMichael.
Here.
Mr. Nagel.
Here.
Mr. Faldine. Mr. Scott. Mr. Israel. Mr. Slappy. Mr. Steed.
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Present.
As well, representatives from Congressman Isaacson's office. And Blastovich, thank you for being here. Alice, thank you for being here, from Congressman Scott, and from Senator Chambliss's office. Bill, thank you for being here. Mr. Chairman, we do not have a quorum. Meeting is over to you.
Thanks, sir. We'll call the meeting to order for the first quarter partnership meeting, 21st Century Partnership meeting. I welcome you that are attending. Appreciate your support. Well, enough said about roll call. We need support beyond these walls here, and appreciate anything you can do with that. Let's get started with the prayer and the pledge. Mr. Steve, if you'll help us out with that, please.
Our Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day that you have made, and we are glad in it. We're grateful for the many blessings you have bestowed upon us, and we ask that you bless our great nation and its leaders. Lord, have mercy on us. Help us to listen to you. Show us how to love everyone. Help us to understand your will and do it. Bless all our partnership members, even inactive ones. Give us the wisdom, tenacity, and the will to carry out 21st Century Partnership program. Guide and bless our families. Thank you, Lord. In his holy name we pray. Amen. Amen. Please join with me in the pledge of allegiance to our flag.
September and December minutes. We'll move into our financial reports. Todd Gibbons, will give us the private sector, please.
This is the report from December 1, 2012 to February 28, 2013. We had a beginning balance of $42,380. We had collections or receipts of $213,212. Expenditures for that period of time, $164,895, for an ending balance on February 28, 2013 of $90,697.
Thank you. And Laura Mathis, can you give us the governance update?
Yes, sir. We began the quarter with a balance of $2,057.79. Had revenue, including member contributions and bank interest, of $2,046.17, and no expenditures through the quarter, leaving a balance at $318 of $4,103.96.
Okay, thank you. And without a quorum, we'll pass on the approval of financials, hopefully at the next meeting. Laura, if you'll join us, Sam, for the update on the BRAC studies. Pretty exciting stuff there. We appreciate your work on it.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. Although I'm the one doing the presentation, I'm going to be talking about the work that's being done by the Regional Commission, a team from the Regional Commission. We have 4 staff members who are assigned various areas. And what we want to do this morning is sort of lay out the scope of the work that we're doing. Later this month will be the start of the release of the reports. And we'll sort of end the presentation with giving you a release schedule that's been proposed to the partnership. If you want to go to the next one, there you go. We're looking at 2 different issues: inside the fence or inside the installation, and then external community issues. And we're comparing 13 installations across the country. And these installations range in size and the branch of service that they primarily support. Obviously, we're comparing Middle Georgia to the 2 other ALCs, but we also have some areas that are specialized bases where there may be opportunities for Middle Georgia going forward. And as I mentioned, they are scattered across the country. They range in size from a host community in that region of about 80,000 in that region where the base is located, to about 4 million in San Diego. So quite a wide range of installations. We've learned a lot about different parts of our country going through this process. We'll go to the next one. We are doing, addressing a variety of issues. As I said, it's those issues that are community-based that have an impact on an installation, but also looking at those things that are unique to each installation and where there may be opportunities, and really trying to objectively assess just the facts associated with each of the installations on these very important issues. What I'm going to do now is simply run through each of the different factors to give you a snapshot of the kind of issues that we are looking at. First, in education and crime. In education, we're looking not only at what's that student-teacher ratio, what's the graduation rate, the dropout rate, but also looking at that pipeline for science and math and technology fields. Thankfully, for all the things that have been said, good and bad, about No Child Left Behind, it has actually made it really easy to compare school districts across the state. We're looking at about 650 different school districts. And delving into did they make adequate yearly progress, what are their math and science scores, and also going beyond that elementary education to the workforce development programs, graduate college programs, and technical college programs, and trying to assess sort of the condition of the workforce that is there to support an installation. In the area of crime, obviously looking at crime rates, not just for the host installation, but for that region that supports the installation. Response times, that per capita expenditure for law enforcement, trying to gauge, is it a safe area for a military operation to be located?
Before, and Laura, just interrupt, many of you are seeing this for the first time, and the specifics that we're looking at. So please feel free to ask questions as we go through to get clarification of what it is that we're looking at. This is really for you as the board to fully understand that which we're trying to do and the direction we're headed. So please feel free to ask questions of Laura as we're going through this.
Thanks. The next two studies will be medical availability and housing. On medical availability, when you look at the questions that are provided to each community in preparation for BRAC, they ask some pretty specific questions, so we're going ahead and finding out the answers to those questions for Middle Georgia and for those who we see as our primary competition going forward. So that's number and availability of hospital beds, the number of doctors, the physician specialties that are there, and the level of care that's available. In the area of housing, Department of Defense has a set methodology when they look at housing cost and housing availability. And so we have actually gone through the approval process of getting clearance from the Department of Defense to receive all of that information. And we'll be looking at the housing stock and the availability and affordability of housing and occupancy status. What's the foreclosure rates, that sort of thing. Unfortunately, that's probably going to be one of the things that hurts Georgia. Georgia, unfortunately, is pretty high in the ranks of the states for foreclosures. The next area that we're going to be looking at is cost of living and innovation. Obviously, cost of living, folks know what that all includes. Is how much it costs for you to live, whether it's utilities, food, medical care, your buying power of how much of your salary you can actually spend on goods and services. Innovation, I will take just a second to talk about this because this is actually not a matrix that we developed. It's one that we have access to and that we utilize, that we are updating. It's actually a matrix that was developed in 2005 by the Economic Development Administration that looks at about 50 different factors that go into whether or not a community, a region, or a nation, or a state are good environments for innovation. It looks at things like how often do you have turnover in business activity, poverty rates, unemployment rates, and it also looks at things like how many patents per 1,000 people are generated or applied for, to give you a sense of, is this a community that's growing and innovative and trying to do things differently and grow that segment of the economy. Under transportation, transportation is one of those, it'd be sort of a different kind of report, and I'll talk at the end about sort of the structure of the reports. The inventory and assessment, we're going to be looking at the level of service and the availability of services surrounding installations, being the interstate highways, the road system, rail facilities, airports and seaports, as well as the availability of public transportation. And then also trying to assess any major problems or projects that are planned in the near future that may be an asset to that installation or a detriment to that installation. The report will include a comparative analysis and basically a summary of all of those factors. And then we'll actually create a snapshot to tell you how Middle Georgia stacks up to the other installations at this moment in time on this particular issue. The issue of encroachment, again, it'll be a snapshot that's developed and looking at some key factors. What is it that BRAC's going to be looking at when they address the issue as to whether or not there is an encroachment problem surrounding that installation. So we'll talk about what it means by encroachment, and then also do an assessment of each different installation as to where they are in addressing that problem. One of the key things that's necessary is a joint land use study, JLUIS, which is down at the end. The last bullet there. We have, I think the last time that JLUIS was updated for Middle Georgia was in 2004. So as part of this, we will be updating the JLUIS at the same time that we're doing all of these studies, so that is more current than almost 10 years ago. Also, REPI is the program that has been utilized heavily for addressing the encroachment problem in Middle Georgia. So we'll be looking at what other installations are doing through that program, which is the Department of Defense program. Next is air quality. We've learned a whole lot about all those, the PM2 and the ozone and all of those things we've heard from the Clean Air Coalition, and looked at projections as to where each installation will be once the new standards are in place. and have to have compliance by 2020, who is expected to be in place in that. We've also looked at whether or not there are comparable groups to the Clean Air Coalition that are addressing those issues, and whether or not a community, a base and its host community are in attainment or non-attainment. Community cost reduction activities. This one and the next are a little more difficult from the standpoint of where do you stop? Because it can really keep going and going as to the different things you look at. But it's identifying those things or opportunities for a community to help offset some of the operational cost of a military installation. And I know at some of the previous partnership meetings you've heard from Colonel Buchhofer of the opportunities that may exist for some shifting of services being on base to being provided by the community. But it's not just what are the possibilities, but it's also what is it that communities are doing today to help shift that operational cost from being an on-base cost to being a community-provided service. And then capacity to grow. This is a factor that looks at the ability of land on the installation, what opportunity there is for new missions to be physically supported on the installation, and then also on the community side, are there other assets that are available to the installation that the base could have access to if there were arrangements in place. As I mentioned, we have developed a reschedule. Education, innovation, transportation, and air quality will be released to the partnership at the end of March. We have another series of reports that are due out in April, then May, and then finally in June. We've shifted some of the ones like capacity to grow, community cost reduction, and capacity to absorb new emissions to the last studies that will be released due to some current efforts and discussions that are going on that just started in the last few months to allow sort of that process to unfold and us to be able to capture that. There are three studies on there that we have not, that I didn't cover, and I apologize for that, I realized that this morning. As the ones I covered were the original list of studies. As we've gone through this process, we've added two. We've added to the list of studies 3 different reports. One is the economic impact of the installation to that community. The next is childcare, looking at the availability of federally licensed childcare centers. And the third is veteran services and the availability of veteran services in proximity to the installation. That's the reports. Each one will be on a particular topic. You'll have a summary of each installation, and then with the data, and then the analysis and sort of the impact. And if there's a ranking that's being developed, that'll be included. Once all of the reports are complete, we'll actually provide to the partnership a summary of each installation. So if you needed to know everything there was to know about Letterkenny and that installation, you could just pick up that report and it will tell you the complete picture. And then a comparison of that one installation to Robins Air Force Base. As the process unfolds, we'll be able to zero in on the issues that we need to address. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Well,
Yes, ma'am.
this is an aggregate of how many counties are you considering to be Middle Georgia?
That's a great question. We are looking at the host community, and we're doing this across the country, looking at the host community, and if it is in an MSA, the communities that make up that MSA. If it is not, then the counties that are immediately adjacent to that installation. So for like the example in Middle Georgia, we are not including the same 11 counties that are in our region because Putnam County, which is an hour away from here, is not really considered part of that base support region.
So how many counties for us are there?
I want to say 5.
But Angie, as you look at the briefing, at what will be presented, you'll see it broken out 2 ways. The first is for the host community, the host MSA. and then you'll look at the region around it. So that information will be delineated two different ways so that we can look at it, because what we don't know is what a BRAC commission would do, whether they would say, okay, what's the host community look like? What does the region look like? So what Laura's given us is the data both ways.
Right. I know we're blessed with so many counties in this state, so I wondered when you start looking at the other installations, are they truly taking, you know, a massive area into
For as
account?
many indicators as we can, and there, as many data points as we can, we are trying to get it down to where, since we are comparing an area that's 4 million to an area that's less than 100,000, trying to get it down to a per person, per capita basis, just for comparison's sake, to put it in context. You know, we can't compete with the educational institutions that are in San Diego, California. But when so we're drilling down to on a per capita basis, what are the opportunities that are available and how does it compare then? And then, as the general said, we'll provide it for when you look just host community to host community. What's the comparison, and then the host region to the host region.
Can you explain the innovation index?
I'll try. As I mentioned, it takes about 50 different data sets that look at unemployment, per capita income, population aged 25 and older, their educational attainment, business churn, which is how often business activity, new businesses open and close, the number of patents, the concentration of science and technology employment in the area. It's all of them off the top of my head. And it weights the different factors. It's depending on how much the research has shown have an influence on innovation. So they aren't all weighted equally. And it allows us, one of the reasons why we chose this as a tool is that first it allows us to create a custom region so that we can look, if we needed to have 3 counties, 5 counties, or the entire state, we were able to create that custom area. And then you actually have the source data that allows you to drill down and understand, for example, when you're looking at that region on per capita income and you see that our scores is kind of low or kind of high, you can drill down and say, okay, well, it would be this except for this county or this area which is contributing to that being the score. And it also allows us to compare statewide, sort of how do we stack up in the state, and then how does the state stack up in the country. And it covers the period from 1997 to 2000. Bless your heart. Thank you. I'm going from memory.
Sure you don't.
Yes, educational attainment, population growth rates, high-tech, employment share, technology-based knowledge occupations, poverty, unemployment, net migration, how much population activity there is, the per capita income growth, changes in high-tech employment, job growth, gross domestic product per worker, average patents per 1,000 people. And I can tell you, when you just look at Midddle, Georgia,
We don't look so good.
not on that way. I mean, we're like 0.2 in the States, and if you look at the Atlanta region, it's 7, and I'm like, okay, no, well, that's an opportunity for us. Average venture capital, broadband density and penetration, establishment churn, and establishment size. Do you have a lot of big business or a lot of small business, or what's that mix of your industry? They all go into the calculation with various weights and percentages, adding to the total score.
This one's going to be interesting.
It's really interesting. We sort of go on. It's one that we can't stop messing with. Because you start figuring out that, ooh, well, I wonder if we did this, if we combined these counties, if we did this, what would it be? So,
Thank you.
yes, ma'am.
What period did you say this is going to cover?
The Innovation Index pulls data from 1997 to 2009, the update that we're doing is for all of those data sources where there is 2010 or 2011 data.
I'm talking about the whole report, not just the innovation.
It's actually,
As real-time a snapshot as we can, depending upon what, there are a series of databases out there, Kathy, that hopefully some will end at 2011, some will include 2012, so we're taking the snapshot as current a picture as we possibly can for where we are today.
Are we going to, I know there's new criteria here from a previous BRAC, but I mean, are we going to show also a comparison between any improvements or?
Hold that question for just a second, and when Laura's done, what I'd like to do is talk about what our plan is from here on out. That's a great question.
Okay.
yes, sir.
Two things that's important to military that might be considered in this. And number one is under education, Laura, whether or not the state in which a base is located is friendly to the military personnel as far as giving them in-state tuition of higher education.
Okay, so state support of education.
Yes, from a military point of view, since they're the military transient, whether or not they get the same treatment that in-state people get.
Okay.
And that becomes important to a lot of military families. Another thing is under economics, whether or not the base and the region is compassionate to military dependents as far as employment goes. Because a lot of the military dependents, their wives or their spouses work, and when they get transferred, they wonder whether or not they're going to be able to get a job at the next base.
For example, the fact that we're about to pass the licensure here in the state of Georgia, your point would be that we ought to ensure that we're comparing ourselves to others in that positive light.
Yes, sir.
That's a great point.
The reciprocity issue is big between states.
Okay. Great. Great. Anything else? Terrific. Thanks, sir.
Let me, if I could, first of all, thank Laura publicly for the tremendous work that she's doing. And to set expectations for all of you, a couple of points. And I'll pick education as an example, since it's one of the first studies that will come out. Laura will give us, in the partnership, the study that is complete. What she'll give us, as she talked about, is an assessment of Houston County as the host, the region of how we did, some specifics in each area, and then an assessment of where we stand in comparison to the other 12 communities that she highlighted earlier. This is just step one in a process. Because the reality is, although this is information, or this is really data, it's not yet information. And more importantly, what it doesn't do is talk about what our opportunities are to improve this community, and in this case, education for the community. So the intent then is for the partnership to bring together the leaders throughout the community, to bring in this case, education. You would invite the board chairman for the school systems to come in, have a chance to understand what the data shows, and then facilitate a discussion about what we can do as a region to enhance that which we provide. And our intent within the partnership is to facilitate that conversation. In some cases, we know that there is already a methodology for doing that. For example, Clean Air Coalition. There is no reason for us to do anything to subsume anything that they're doing or to facilitate, but simply do this in conjunction with the Clean Air Coalition when we talk about clean air. But to ensure that there is an understanding of the sensitivity of our performance, good or bad, in terms of those factors that we believe will be looked at in future rounds of BRAC. And then to build the plan to move forward, utilizing the experience throughout our region, and then to get to the next level. There may be a bill that we can't afford here. There may be some things that we can do very easily to change from a 10 ranking to a 3 ranking. Those are the things that we want to look at, take advantage of, and move forward. Because, and I'm looking at Mike Dyer and Angie Giesling in particular, everything that we are looking at right here not only is good for Robins Air Force Base, but it is good for economic development in Middle Georgia, across our region. And so the investment that we are making with the Regional Commission in helping lay out what this plan is, where we're doing well, where we have challenges, will benefit not only the future of Robins Air Force Base, but more importantly from our perspective, enhance our ability to improve economic development throughout the region. And that's why I think what we're leveraging here is to the benefit of this entire region, not just to the future of Robins. Can I answer any questions on our way forward? This is a two-edged sword, because this information, because of what we're doing, will be public. And if we're number 1, we can all do high fives. If we're number 12, a lot of people are going to know that we're number 12 in an area outside of this region. And so part of what our responsibility as the partnership is to be as honest and as realistic as we possibly can as we talk about this information internally to do the things that we need to do to move forward. But as we tell the story of Middle Georgia and Robins Air Force Base, is wherever possible with this process, is to paint it in the best possible light. As an example, if in the area of medical support, if you look at simply Houston County and we were number 7, and I'm making up the numbers, so please no one write this down. But if we included BIB with that in the region and we moved to number 3, the story that the partnership would tell to a BRAC commission and to the larger community writ large would be that regional perspective to say this is where we are. As opposed to, for example, education, if you were to look at Houston County and we were number 3, and then you look at the region and perhaps drop to number 10, the story that we would tell forward is focused on Houston County, and we would logic that says, because a majority of our military, a clear majority, live in the host county, that's how we would tell the story. We will work collectively with all of you to do what I've just described. This isn't Chrissy Miner and Bob McMahon doing this with Brad looking over our shoulder. This is a community effort to do the best that we possibly can in telling the story. Have I generated any questions?
Hey Bob, these other installations, have they done similar studies that you're able to look at that are out there?
In some cases, there are communities light years ahead of where we are in doing what they're doing. They've gotten state funding, and they have vast volumes of dollars flowing them to do some of these things and to solve some of these issues. In some cases, there are communities that haven't even begun to think about this.
We're very interested in what we're doing.
Yes, and when Laura calls, they're going, I'm sorry, could you tell me that question again? And they're going, you know, all of a sudden we're now waking some communities up, which is also concerned. But this is, ladies and gentlemen, from my perspective, this is the test. We have an open book test in the next breath. Could there be other questions? The answer is yes. But we know, based upon past history, these are areas, both inside the fence and outside the fence, that past BRACs have looked at. We share that information, and then as other things we become aware of perhaps other issues, then we add it to this list of the studies.
Is all the funding for this coming for donations to the partnership?
The partnership has funded this entire effort, and we are paying for it out of our coffers, irrespective of where those dollars came from. In some cases, the counties and the city money. In some cases, the foundations that have supported us. In some cases, some of the businesses that have supported us as well. But yes, we have not specifically allocated only money from this area for these studies. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get in my portion. It is extremely important for you all to understand what we're doing here and to be comfortable with the process. You're not necessarily going to like all the results, but this will identify the opportunities for us to move in the right direction. Mike?
I forget, on the last BRAC, we did something similar to this, I know. Was that analysis that we had to submit, was it only centered around the host city at that time, or was that regional in scope too? I just forget what we did back then.
General Smith, any?
We did it both.
Anything else before we move on? And again, we'll continue to bring back the results of this to the entire board. But as we move forward and get these studies and have a chance to digest it, we'll ask together the senior leaders and those most affected by each to sit down with us and help us move forward.
Thank you, sir. Laura, your team is fantastic in the meetings that we've had so far and the updates. I mean, couldn't be more professional, more thorough, and we thank you for that and look forward to these results. Again, to remind everybody, these are facts, and you know, while we believe and we are a great defense community in a lot of levels, there are some things as we look in the mirror that might not be so pretty, but those are things that I think all of us need to know and have a baseline to so that we can improve our community and our region. So not only in support of Robins Air Force Base, but in terms of further development throughout, further community development, economic development throughout the region. So thank you again, Laura. At this time, Chrissy, if you'll give us a communication update, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have the best job in the partnership because I get to tell the story of what we are doing and the wonderful things that this community is doing. This is a cloud, which looks like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, and it basically is. But if you think and take into consideration the amount of communications that you are given every day, whether it be talking face-to-face to a person, looking at a billboard, listening to a commercial, listening to the radio, you are probably touched thousands upon thousands of times every day with the communication piece. So my job is to make sure that we hone on to the most important aspects of that communication and deliver our clear message to our intended audiences to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing and where we're going. Right now, in the first 90 days, this is about 90 days on the job, best job I've ever had in my life, we are focusing on a couple of areas. The Partnership Weekly Roundup. Hopefully most of you in this audience have started to see this appear in your inbox. It's a compilation of stories generated from the partnership and also stories external to the partnership that are of significance importance to all of you as well. We have also begun Facebook and Twitter. Currently, we had 122 likes this morning, and we have 68 followers on Twitter. Doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm sure. How many have a Facebook account here? If you could give me a show of your hands. Okay, the clear minority.
You are not our intended audience.
How about Twitter? Can I get, yeah. Okay. So all of you that are now aware that we have these, I hope that you will be our friends and tweet us here in the next few days. Also, we've got a vigorous billboard campaign. Starting 1 April, you're going to start to see billboards throughout Middle Georgia in strategically placed locations that are welcome them to the home of Robins Air Force Base. And also advertise some of our communication points, which will get them to our website, get them to our Facebook and Twitter page, so they can become informed as well. And if you'll jot down our web address, by 1 April, you should see that come live. We have also been blessed to speak with some numerous community organizations to tell them what we are doing with the studies, just as we were telling you this morning. What are we doing with our studies? How are they going to be used? And what does that mean, importantly, to you? So, again, we're doing a grassroots effort to the fall. And why is this all important? We have numerous audiences. We are blessed to have you as our primary audience, the leadership within this community. But if we're going to wage a battle, we need to make sure that we have soldiers. So we need a grassroots effort. We need to get the folks that are on the flight line turning wrenches. We need to get everybody within this region, even if they don't have a direct affiliation base, even if their uncle, their cousin, their brother works at the base. We want to make sure that they know who the 21st Century Partnership is, what we're doing, and most importantly, how that benefits them. And therefore, we can wage a proper battle and we can be successful in the future. Thank you very much.
Questions for Chrissy?
Chrissy, thank you very much. And I think to that point, obviously, we're the choir in here. We got to get that message out to the congregation bigger. All right, and these vehicles will do that. And I still might join Facebook. We'll see. Join me in if you'll give us an update.
First, for those that had not met Chrissy prior to this opportunity, there should be no doubt in your mind to know why we wanted and the board wanted to steal her from Robins Air Force Base and bring her into the partnership to do all those things that we just described. Let me walk through a couple of things that you may have heard about to make sure that you have a full understanding of what it is that we're doing. The first is this idea of public-public and public-private initiatives. This is focused on our opportunity to reduce base operating costs for Robins Air Force Base. There was specific language in the 2013 National Defense Authorization Act that allows us for the first time to leverage community, public side and private side, their initiatives, their contracts, their work to benefit inside the federal fence. As an example, I'll make up an example that we're looking at. Say the county or the city, and it could be any county or city in our region, has a remarkably beneficial contract to cover refuse pickup that would save the base literally millions of dollars in its operating costs by leveraging that contract. We now have the opportunity the first time to take advantage of that. And so we began probably about 60 days ago of bringing communities together with the base, and the 21st Century Partnership is facilitating the conversation between the community and the base to figure out where those opportunities are to drive down base costs. In a perfect world, what we will do is reduce base operating costs, a factor that will be considered in the efficiency of the base, in reality at no cost to the communities because we're simply leveraging tools that are available to us. So we are headed that direction. In some cases, there may be a small cost as we look at different issues. We'll work through those. But the good news is when you put a lot of innovative people in a room, we're getting ideas that we hadn't even begun to think about. There are a total of originally five Air Force bases that were considered test bases. Chrissy's, and I'll get to why this is important, Chrissy attended a conference down in San Antonio sponsored by the Association of Defense Communities. We weren't even aware that these opportunities were out here to be considered a test base. Thanks to her initiative, working with the base, there are now 6 test bases in the United States Air Force, and Robins Air Force Base is one of them. And, oh, by the way, because of some contacts that we have, we are probably now the most aggressive of those test bases, and that's what we're looking to create, is that environment, that belief that if you want to see innovation, you go to Robins Air Force Base. And this is a great opportunity. You'll hear more about this over the next 90 to 120 days. The second effort has to do with an initiative that we have with the Georgia Center of Innovation focused on aerospace. Interestingly enough, and we're doing, again, this is about partnerships with the community. Angie and her team out of Houston County are working closely with us in supporting this operation. But if you look at the number of contracts that are led by the base on an annual basis, and you look at where those dollars are spent, for Robins Air Force Base, roughly 8% of those dollars are kept right here in Middle Georgia. If you look at Oklahoma City and Ogden, that number goes up to 15%. Imagine if we even could find half of that and keep it right here in Middle Georgia in terms of contracts. Well, to do that, you've got to understand the data. You've got to understand why the contracts are being let where they are, and identify what that list of possible opportunities are for us to move forward. And so we've begun that, the partnership, working with the state. We'll look at going through and doing the data analysis to figure out if there's any ponies in this pile, and then figuring out what it is that we can do to keep more of those dollars here in Midddle, Georgia, which benefits our entire business community across the community, or across this region. Do we know that they're there? The answer is no, not until we look at the data, but common sense tells us there's some opportunities and we want to take advantage of this. Third area is the new economic impact statement. Many of you have seen this already. I want to make sure that everyone is comfortable. We have talked about $4.49 billion for a number of years. It's now down to $2.88 billion. It's not because there's been a dramatic change at the base, but what has now happened is that the Air Force has standardized the way that it calculates economic impact. And there are a number of factors that were originally in this that we were using at the base that we no longer consider, in particular having to do with both medical and military retirees that are now out of this equation, but now you have an apples-to-apples comparison with the other installations. I will tell you that $2.88 billion is still a fairly big number. I know to some of you it may not be, but I will tell you from my perspective, we're looking at a pretty good sized number. And this is the key factor in my mind, is this local jobs creation and what that really means. So any questions on this change and what it really means? Again, part of this is the communication process of making sure folks understand that nothing significantly has changed. Okay, let me talk about a new focus slide as I go out, and we have an opportunity to talk to different groups. This is the slide that we're now using to really describe what the partnership does. The heart of it is this idea of enhancing the military value of Robins Air Force Base. Our efforts are focused in 4 areas, and you can see those around the quad chart: strategic planning, and obviously BRAC is a critical element of that, but as we talked earlier, this idea of regional economic development is just as important, because many of the things that we do getting ready for BRAC affect that. It's into communication, and Chrissy's already talked to you about many of our opportunities there to make this community aware of what's happening with regards to Robins Air Force Base and how the partnership is supporting that. We spend a great deal of time with our friends both in Atlanta when they are there, as well as our friends in Washington. One of the examples that I mentioned earlier is this idea of licensure and the efforts that we collectively across the military communities of Georgia pushed on our state legislature. There was pushback from certain areas within the State House. We got the military communities to roll in on this issue, and as it was discussed earlier, this is a big issue that we can bring in. For example, if you are a registered nurse, you don't have to get relicensed if you are the spouse of a military member, assuming this gets passed, which it looks like it will. But if you come into the state now, you had to get re-registered for this state and recertified and relicensed. With what's about to pass through the Senate, and it's already passed through the House, that military spouse can now come here and they will recognize that license from another state. Tremendously important, because as many of you know who have been doing this for a while, many of our military members come here unaccompanied and leave their spouse and children elsewhere, so because they're a dual income family and they can't afford to have the spouse lose that income. So instead of renting an apartment now, you're going to see more house sales because folks are going to bring the family with them. And the impact that that has on the economy, as well as infusing, and I won't use Dr. Dan's term that he uses, but what it will do is infuse some new blood into the community, some new experience into the community, and perhaps increase our opportunities in some critical licensed areas. It looks like it's going to pass, but those are the kind of things that we do. Another example is, we talked about encroachment. We had a hang-up with $3 million coming out of the federal government that were dollars directly going to the regional commission to buy land in the areas that were impacted. Part of our engagement and tremendous work by the Regional Commission, but found a roadblock, a call to one of our senators, and magically a day later, those dollars broke loose.
Thank you.
And that is, those are the kind of things that hopefully we're adding value. And then again, on issue management, how many have heard of this thing called sequestration? You're probably tired of hearing us talk about it, but the reality is we feel that that's our role on these critical issues. We need to bring the message to you, whether we do it in face-to-face or through Chrissy and the job that she's doing in terms of communication. That's what's important, is get the message out. Slide, please. Talk for just a minute about a requirement slide. General Smith, who serves as one of my mentors, and he's got a tough job because I need all the mentoring that I can get, said, you need to talk differently about what you're doing and tying it to the dollars that you require. And so this is our first attempt at doing a better job of communicating. We've told you for a number of months now what we see our requirement to be for $1 million annually. We've kind of scoped that back to about $920,000 annually. You ask us, what are you doing with the money? This is what we're doing with the money. When you look at $420 for BRAC Prep, a whole lot of that is going to the Regional Commission for the studies that we've asked for that everyone benefits from. But if you've got recommendations, new ideas on how to do this, we'd be delighted to hear from you. This engagement, and I will continue to say this, virtual presence is actual absence. If you are not in the room where the conversation takes place, you are not going to get the scraps on the table. You're not going to have an opportunity to make an input and make a difference. And I will tell you, we learned that very quickly at a meeting in Oklahoma City about 10 days ago that Chrissy talked about in her release last week. And there are a variety of opportunities coming up, and we're going to continue to take advantage of it as long as we can. Slide, please. Finally, a quick update on the capital budget. We have been blessed, as I've told you in each meeting, to have Miss Emily here. Emily Myers has done a tremendous job of helping us get dollars from areas that we didn't think possible. I give Rick Goddard tremendous credit for helping us create a 501c3. And so this is a sense of where we are. And we've broken it out a little bit more to tell you what we've had pledged in 2013 and what we've received today. And this is as of 2 days ago of where we are and where our funds are coming from. This is 100% of those that have committed $1 to the 21st Century Partnership.
I have pledge cards in the car.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay. Any questions on any of my presentation? There's a number of initiatives underway to help us on our fundraising locally. Thanks to, and I won't point out everybody in this room, but thanks to those who are working aggressively to help find some new funding sources for us. There are opportunities out there. Miss Emily continues to find new opportunities. We've got 3 calls today. We've got a major call tomorrow that will go out there and look. But to do the things that we've described for you that we need to do, which benefits not only Robins Air Force Base, but the entire region, and to leverage those studies and do something with them requires your support. Slide, please. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. To expand just a little bit on our visit to Taker, we were out there, Mike, you were with us with General Goddard and Morgan too, to welcome General George a little less than a year ago. This visit was obviously an entirely different visit because we were visiting with the 3-star Sustainment Center. We toured the GM plant, which is a 2.4 million square foot under roof plant that GM actually, I'm sorry, that the county let bonds for, to the tune of about $55 million and handed it to Tinker Air Force Base for $1. That's now inside the fence. You know, sometimes lucky happens. We don't have that plan here, but we do have some things in the community that we can do for Robinson to support our sustainment effort too. You know, also highlight too, there's a brand new Boeing campus right across the street from the center. And I don't recall what that investment is, $35 million, something along those lines. General Smith, can you comment any more about that visit the other day?
Well, I mean, Tinker's an impressive community and facility, and that wasn't news to what's going out there, sort of revalidation. I think that when we set through, I think you need to understand that meeting out there, the Three-Star had representatives from each of the three communities, Tinker, Hill, and Robin. And I think that, I'm sitting here thinking about this, that chart, but I couldn't read the bottom line, but I've seen it before. If you think about spending a whole day with the Three-Star and his staff, what the journal said is true. If you're not there, you ain't playing. And I think this group needs to understand, if you don't have this group, which is the best in the business of doing what they do, if you don't have them there, you forfeit a seat at the table. Well, here's what was discussed out there, in private and in public. What is the best strategy for Air Force industrial facilities in a BRAC? Do you stand on your own, or do you try to work now to get DoD to look at the industrial capacity as a service? We have three large ones, more modernized, and try to get to work. What if we didn't have McMahon and Miner and Finco? What if you didn't have somebody look at these regional studies? Because the rest of them do. What if you have somebody working the state? What if you have somebody working with this Title 10 that had that been left to the devices and not caught by the partnership, depots would have been excluded from the modifications on airplanes, about 40% of what we do. So what I'm leading to is, ahead of the bunch, it was a sobering experience, by the way, to realize what happens. One, what's in front of us, and second is, if we don't invest now, we're going to forfeit the best intellectual capital we can get and not use it to be ready to attract missions, a BRAC or no BRAC. And obviously that community that is invested heavily. I hate to say that anything BRAC group, they've done about as good a job of BRAC group at the base that you'll see anywhere in America. And it's hard to believe that any Okies smarter than any Georgian, but they've done a wonderful, wonderful job. There's no denying it. You got to face it. You got to learn from it. You got to get over it. But I'm leading up to, we got to give this team the resources that they need to go do what we all want them to do and expect them to do. And being from Tennessee, I can't do all that math too quickly than I heard before, but if you're spending money like that, you're sort of like my house. Your outflows are more than your inflows. So we got to fix that, and there's some people in this room, smart people, who have a plan, and we're working at it. And it's a pretty simple plan, and it's an inexpensive plan for every person in the world. So we're going to execute it. So those of you that are in chambers and business, get ready, because we're coming.
Thank you, sir.
Don't ask me any more questions. I'm sorry I took so much time.
Yes, sir. All right, is there any new business for the good of the order? Old business, any new business? All right, I'd like to just hit sequestration one more time. Obviously, you've heard about the 22 furlough days, how that's going to affect inside the fence. As many of you know too, that's going to affect outside the fence with business and small business as well. And I would just challenge us all to keep those dollars local. Certainly the chambers do a good job of pounding that drum, but I think now more than any, as we can, keep our spending power within our region. And you know, not only are the inside the fence affected, certainly outside the fence with that economic churn is going to be affected through this stretch too. We're in a different time right now, and it's funny, a couple times this week I've heard it from either secondhand or even firsthand where sure you've all heard it. You know, from the wrench turner inside the fence, from the community person on the outside of the fence. Robbins is too big and too important to close. This isn't a black cloud comment, but it just means we better be on our game. This is a whole different time. A whole different time in our from our national perspective, and certainly a whole different time in our defense perspective too. So keep that in mind, and we appreciate anything you can do to take this message further into your circles and deeper into the community, and we appreciate any financial support you can give as well. With that, our next meeting is June 20th, same place, same time, and we appreciate you being here today. Meeting adjourned.
I'm on the way. I'm right behind you. Maybe two. Not this week.
I'm good. You got to know what your feedback is there. I think that's a red on now. Oh, no, that's great. Good. How about
And I thought we all the
anyway, let me show you something.
Appreciate that prayer, man.
This is what you do. Hi, Miss Emily.
You doing okay, dear?
Looking so pretty as always.
Oh, well, thank you. You know, I still work at it, you know, every day.
Doing a good job.
perfect. Bless you.
We do. Here's this way. Good to see you.
Yes, sir.
Sure.